Welcome to My Week. I'm Christy McDonald. Thanks so much for joining us. Nolan Finley from the Detroit News is here, as well as Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press. Guys, it's always good to see everyone had a nice holiday.
Of course.
Yeah, there's been that. I took actually a social media blackout for the entire
I would
5
like
days.
to do that. I feel like what? Why are you laughing at me?
The breaks. He gets his phone out.
I feel like work doesn't really permit the space for that anymore. That our work does not permit the space for that.
But you must be connected at all times because you're afraid of missing something.
Yeah, that people are, for a lot of people, that's now a primary way of communicating. Like I get people reaching out to me on Twitter or Facebook for things that they need or want to discuss or whatever. And there is so much going on that the first place you see it often is on those social media platforms.
Twitter, yeah. I
Yeah,
feel like
so
You wouldn't want to miss those dog-faced Snapchat conversations.
that I think we could actually
don't
miss.
do that.
I got to see.
See, I don't want to have any
those.
of that stuff.
All right. Well, obviously, there's no shortage of headlines that we're going to be talking about coming up in the show. But one thing that caught my eye this weekend, looking at Dan Gilbert and breaking ground on the Brush Park development, they were talking about how now
My new home, you mean?
your potential new home, but how they're going to be changing the skyline of Detroit. Whereas we've seen so much of them buying up buildings and filling the space and rehabbing, but now that they want to change the skyline and talking about some of these new developments, 2 new towers that would go in, and I think that's an interesting prospect for what we could see in the city now.
Well, it's the natural progression. I mean, once you buy up and build out all the existing buildings, you still need space. This 20-story building he's talking about will be the first high-rise, I think, in Detroit since the casino hotels.
I guess if you count those as high rises, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, they are.
I guess they are, right. The one in Greektown, right?
As is the MGM.
And Motor City.
But yeah, I mean, it's been the first development of that kind in a long time, and that's really now the filling in all of these empty gaps in the city's skyline will be a pretty exciting.
It's also, and I got to be really careful here that I don't get in trouble with the preservationists and the architecture folks who are really, protective of the architecture here in Detroit. If you go to other cities, you see more daring architecture in later periods than you do here in Detroit. So in the last 50 years, for instance, if you look at what's been built in Chicago, or if you look at what's been built in Washington or Cleveland even, it is a more risk-taking, I think, attitude than we've had here. And some of it is because we just don't build as much.
We haven't built anything.
Right. And so our skyline looks more, again, I got to be careful about terminology, but a little dated almost in the sense of missing these sort of new, really interesting architectural things that people are doing. I was in Chicago over the summer and took the architecture tour, and the number of new buildings, I lived there 20 years ago, but the number of new buildings just in the last 2 or 3 years, the number of things we saw that were being built was really amazing.
And so, Gilbert is promising a signature piece for that Hudson site, and it'll be interesting to see what the final design.
Still waiting to hear about that. And also it brings up some talk about incentives for building. Also, we're going to talk about some tax incentives coming up. And you had an interesting, a piece that you wrote, Nolan, about Joan Larson and how Donald Trump, if he's looking for the Supreme Court, he should look for.
I think she'd be a good pick on for a number of reasons. One, she's very qualified, very smart, and a noted legal scholar. But she's also somebody I believe can get confirmed. And the Supreme Court appointee will still need 60 votes. They blew up. Harry Reid blew up
60 to stop the debate. Yeah.
To get approval. I mean,
you only need 51 votes to approve, but you need 60 votes to stop the debate.
They're going to have to They're going to have to convert 9 Democrats to get her through the process. Harry Reid blew that up for all of the lower court appointees, but they preserved it for the high court. And I think you should preserve it for the high court and should restore it for the lower courts. I think that was a good rule to have in place. But anyway, I think she's one candidate who can get 9 Democratic votes. I think she's.
And really, is that what it's all about? Comes down to.
Well, you do have to. I mean, you got to stop the filibuster or eliminate it.
Yeah.
And I think there will be some pressure on the Senate majority to eliminate that rule. I mean, I think a lot of Republicans think it should go.
But her qualifications.
Oh no, I think I think she's quite qualified and a wonderful jurist. I don't have any problems. I don't have any real objections. Joan Larson. I mean, we endorsed her for.
But I think you can perhaps get her appointed, confirmed, without blowing up the rule, and I think that's a preferable option. I think when you compare her to some of the other choices.
Yeah, she also doesn't have the long judicial record that sometimes gets people in trouble.
And that can be an asset. I mean, she's pro-life, but she respects precedent, so I think she's not going to be as worrisome to Democrats as some other candidate would be.
All right. Well, you know what? We have a full show coming up for you, taking on the recount in Michigan, the money it's going to cost, and if it's worth it to, quote, ensure the integrity of the election, according to Jill Stein. Plus, the debate over Betsy DeVos's appointment as Education Secretary by President-elect Donald Trump. And lawmakers, well, they're back to work in Lansing, and they're looking at voter ID laws and a change to the school employee retirement system. We will get to it all for you. But let's start off with the Michigan recount, which could cost taxpayers anywhere around $1 million, $4 million, who really knows, as each county starts the process of counting presidential votes again. And that process is going to start on Friday. Stephen, I'm going to start with you. You spoke with Jill Stein this week. The feeling or the thought is that they're not going to change the outcome of the election, but looking for this potential fraud.
Yeah, well, so I guess I was surprised at what her answer was when I asked her what she thought was in this, potentially in this. Her thought is that the machines that we use to count the paper ballots, so, we all fill out the Scantron thing and put it through the machine. She says those machines are prone to some error, and she cited an actual case of that in Toledo and Hamilton County in Ohio, where a significant number of votes, thousands and thousands of votes, didn't get registered by those machines, not because anybody tampered with them or did it purposely, but because the machines weren't calibrated properly before the election in order to count the votes. Because we have 84,000 ballots in Michigan that didn't have a presidential mark at all, she thinks there may be some undercounting of those ballots. Now, will that change the outcome? I don't think it will, because I think a lot of those ballots, those ballots could go either way, right? If they do have a mark, it could be for Donald Trump, it could be for Hillary, it could be for Jill Stein, who knows? But I do think that there is, part of the point she's making is that our system of counting those ballots in this state isn't as secure as it could be. And I think that's a thing we ought to have a debate about. I mean, is there a better way to make sure that every voter's vote is counted the way they intend it to be counted?
Is there a better way, number one, but number two, is this recount the time and place to do it? And the money that will be spent.
Two things. I think Michigan uses the paper ballots and scanner. That's the best way to do it. There's been recounts at district levels in Michigan before that have not turned up significant problems with these machines or with the scanning. And if her intent here is to make some sort of point, start some kind of debate, I think there's a better way to do it than to hit Michigan taxpayers with a $2 to $5 million price tag.
And no one really knows, again, how much it's going to cost.
No, but it's going to cost something. And,
but also,
and I don't believe that's her intent. I think she's carrying the Democrats' water. She's got Mark Brewer as her attorney here.
One of the smartest election minds in the country, legal minds. I mean, I have other problems with Mark Brewer, but you can't.
But I think what's not debatable is he's a Democratic mouthpiece. He's a Democratic operative more than.
But here he's not working for the Democrats.
Well. On the surface, he's not. I think there's a lot of questions to be asked about who's funding all of this. I feel like she's carrying the Democrats' water, and I feel the intent here is part of this ongoing effort to try to delegitimize the new president. I mean, and you see it in a number of ways. The challenges to the
hang on one second. Let him finish.
The challenges to the Electoral College, this movement you have, don't vote the way the folks wanted you to vote.
Okay, now hang on. Do you believe this is an effort to delegitimize the new president?
So I don't believe that. I believe that, first of all, this is part of the election process. I mean, this is laid out in election law, just like all the other things that we do when we select people for office. So this is not some extraordinary measure that we're inventing on the back end.
Never been done before.
Well, but because no one's asked for it to be done. So you have the right to ask when it's this close to have the votes recounted. Ultimately, I think this is a confidence-affirming exercise, because if there isn't a problem, if there isn't a significant discrepancy between the way the votes were counted on November 8th and the way they will be recounted, then it shows that a lot of the things that the president-elect has said about voter fraud and other things, really irresponsible stuff that he has sort of pursued, it wipes that away. It says, look, the votes were counted. They were cast and counted the way that they should have been. We recounted them to be sure. There's no reason for people to suspect that anything is going on.
I think there'll be no end to it. I think the next step from here will be, no matter how this turns out, will be lawsuits, court cases, and I think
about
again,
what
it's an ongoing process, and to cast doubt on the legitimacy of the election and the legitimacy of this president.
Well, the count is.
But the president's down. He's casting doubt on the legitimacy of it. He won the election and is still arguing that there were millions of fraudulent votes.
Is that
cast.
your example that you want to follow?
You're saying that these other people are
I'm not
casting.
saying he's not helping their
casting
cause.
aspersion on the president.
I mean, we wrote the other day. Maybe you just want to shut up and not help them out, or at least kill your Twitter account for a while.
And that is actually that's going to be the start of a larger conversation that we're going to have on the next MiWeek. Is should he get off Twitter, and should we be listening?
Should
to
we all
Trump's
get
tweet?
off Twitter?
All right, I think we should.